3 seconds. Exactly 3 seconds of silence. Representative Sidney Kamlager-Dove asked Attorney General Pam Bondi a very simple question. 4 words, yes or no. Do you believe President Trump is honest? Bondi didn't respond. Not right now. He remained silent for 3 seconds. The cameras were on. At that moment, he was being recorded. The hesitation on his face, the calculations running through his mind, that brief but heavy moment of weighing the consequences of his answer. Then he said, yes. And right here, Kamlager-Dove made an unexpected move. He didn't engage in an argument. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't present a counter-argument. He just started reading a list. 6 separate examples. 6 statements that have been proven to be false in public records. The president's 6 statements that contradict concrete data. Each one had been documented. Each one had been recorded. And one of them was particularly striking. A statement from Bondi's own office that it acknowledged was incorrect during the court proceedings. The power of that moment was here. Kamlager-Dove did not produce a new accusation. She did not comment. He simply juxtaposed Bondi's reliability, which he had just sworn under oath, with official records. This was a classic example of testing a witness's statement against their own record. 3 seconds of silence, followed by a single word, yes, and then the documents speak. At that moment, it was much more effective than an argument. Scene: the 11th of February, 2026. House Judiciary Committee. Afternoon session. Sidney Kamlager-Dove represents California's 37th District. Former state senator, member of the Congressional Black Caucus. A name that doesn't get lost in the details. Someone who asks directly if accountability is needed. She had been watching Pam Bondi for hours, answering questions by changing the subject, framing criticism as a political attack. Avoid making a clear assessment of Trump's statements. The pattern was clear, not saying yes or no directly. Kamlager-Dove decided to break this cycle, but she didn't start with the honesty question. First, he prepared the ground. Trap. The Hortman murders. If the question of honesty comes up first, Bondi could maneuver again. That's why Kamlager-Dove first turned to a concrete, documented, and publicly known incident. Melissa Hortman murders. Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband were killed in their home in June 2025. An investigation was conducted. The FBI got involved. The Department of Justice took over the case. The suspect was apprehended. Evidence was collected, presented in court. The judicial process has progressed. The perpetrator of the incident had been identified in the official records. However, Donald Trump made an allegation on social media linking Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to the incident. This claim was not based on any official accusation or court finding. Kamlager-Dove focused precisely on this point. A sitting president publicly associating a sitting governor with a serious crime. Moreover, in a way that does not align with official investigation results. Here it is, the path to the binding question. First, a foundation of reality that everyone can agree upon. Then a claim that hits that ground. And then the 4-word question that follows. Kamlager-Dove was aware of this. And more importantly, she knew where it should be loaded from. Bondi's office had prosecuted the real perpetrator in the Hortman murder case. This meant the Ministry of Justice had officially demonstrated, in court before the jury, with evidence that Tim Walz had no connection to the incident. The case had been closed. A verdict had been given. The recording was clear. Therefore, Trump's public accusation was inconsistent with the official court filing. Kamlager-Dove said this directly. This was not true, and you know it's not true otherwise. You wouldn't have filed an indictment against someone else. You wouldn't have convicted them in court. And you know it's not true otherwise? You wouldn't have filed an indictment against someone else. You wouldn't have convicted them in court. This sentence was strategically very strong. It didn't present a new claim. He did not comment. He only referenced the action of Bondi's own office. The chain of logic was clear. DOJ charged someone else. That person committed the crime. Walz did not. Trump's claim is false. List. Then Kamlager-Dove listed more examples. A list of statements identified as controversial, or incorrect in public records. But the real punchline was the question that followed the list. 4 words. Do you believe President Trump is honest? This was not a policy question. This was not a question of strategy. This was a character question. Bondi didn't respond immediately. He was silent for 3 seconds. Live broadcast. Official record. Under oath. Those 3 seconds were more captivating to many viewers than the answer itself. If you truly trust a person's honesty, the answer is usually instantaneous. Hesitation leaves room for public interpretation. Answer. In the end, Bondi said, "Of course. He is the commander-in-chief. That commander-in-chief." What was striking was that the justification was not "what they said is true." A defense came from the position. The reason why this moment is being talked about so much lies right here. The question was simple. The answer was delayed. The justification shifted to a different ground. And that 3-second silence became the center of the political debate. "I'm not familiar," Camlogger Dove continued. Did Trump undermine public trust by blaming walls? Bondi's response was brief. "I'm not familiar with that statement." At this point, the picture became even clearer. The Attorney General, unfamiliar with the claim that the president publicly accused a governor, unfamiliar with the discussion related to the outcome of a case conducted by his own office, unfamiliar with the public's reaction to a claim his office refuted in court. For the viewers, there were 2 possibilities. Either there was a lack of information or a deliberate attempt to distance themselves. In both cases, the reliability debate became inevitable. Zero trust. Camlogger Dove got tough. That's why your office and President Trump are facing a trust issue in the public eye. That's why your office and President Trump are facing a credibility issue in public. It hasn't decreased. Not debatable. The fundamental issue is trust. The reason was this. He did not distance himself from an allegation that his office debunked in court. He unconditionally supported the question of honesty in the face of documented examples. He did not draw a clear line between himself and the public. False allegations. Data debate. Camlogger Dove broadened the topic. Department of Justice reports and internal threat assessments. It was known that in previous official analyses, violence originating from the far right was included as a significant threat category. However, the publication style and prioritization preferences of some reports had been a subject of criticism. Camlogger Dove's claim was as follows. If the data is pushed back due to political sensitivity, it creates a problem in terms of public safety. Data transparency. Proper allocation of resources. Accurate information dissemination to the public. Reliability of threat analyses. Is critically important from the perspective of do better. Toward the end of the session, Camlogger Dove said 2 words. Do better. Do better. This was not a slogan, it was a call. What is expected from the chief prosecutor? Not to confuse facts with position, to take a clear stance against claims that contradict the office's official findings, to separate data-driven evaluations from political pressure, because public duty requires accountability before loyalty. Why was this moment important? That 3-second pause, followed by yes, and then the expression, "I'm not familiar with it." All of this raised a bigger question for the viewers. What is a chief prosecutor's priority? The official records of the institution or political allegiance? Camlogger Dove's message was clear. Truth should outweigh position. And that day, the discussion was entirely based on this.